Hey guys, welcome to Cram lesson number 3. Cram lesson number 3 is going to be 2 parts. This is part 1. Part 2 will have 3 works. This one has 3 works. This is all about the art of New Spain. It's a big one. There are 6 artworks. We're going to kind of approach this in a somewhat sequential fashion. And this first video is going to give you an introduction on important things to know about New Spain, and also talk about 3 big works that were all about learning about the new people that they had conquered, converting people to Christianity, and then protecting and defending their faith, the Christian world, their power, a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's the theme of this video. The 6 works are listed on this screen here. The frontispiece of the Codex Mendoza, version of Guadalupe, Angel with Arquebus, Hacia el Timor de, the Brooklyn Biombo, Spaniard and an Indian produce a mestizo, and Portrait of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. The ones highlighted in yellow here are going to be featured on part 1. The ones that aren't will be on part 2. All right, guys, so this is also known as colonial Latin American art. Before these countries became the countries that we know them to be now. They're no longer the indigenous countries that we studied in our Indigenous Americas area. Spain has come in, Spain has conquered, Spain has established itself as the dominant power and the governmental power. So important terms to know. When we talk about the civilizations, the empires that we discussed in the Indigenous Americas in Chunk 11, that's all considered to be pre-contact. So when you're talking about the Inca Empire, the Aztec Empire, the Maya civilization, all the Native American groups before the arrival of Europeans, oftentimes that is now called pre-contact. So 1492 and after the arrival of Spaniards into the Americas, this is oftentimes referred to as post-contact. Sometimes it's also referred to as the viceregal era because the viceroyalties, that's what the area was divided up into, and viceroys ruled them. And these were pretty much just governmental representations of Spain in the New World. So the basic timeline to know. In 1492, Columbus arrives in the New World, what he thinks is Asia. It was not. It was the Caribbean. The first capital of the New World, the first major port, is Santo Domingo, which is still the major city of the Dominican Republic, the capital of the Dominican Republic. In 1535, so it takes them about 40-ish years, New Spain is established. New Spain is the first official viceroyalty of Spain. And then once they establish New Spain, which is pretty much what we call Mexico, but it's much bigger. I'll show you a map in a minute. The Spanish moved south. The Spanish never really moved north into what we call the United States now. They have a little bit of the Southwest as part of New Spain, but for the most part, they go south. So in 1542, just not even 10 years later, they established their second viceroyalty of Peru, which was much bigger than the country we now call Peru. It was pretty much the entire western coast of South America. And then around 1700, the Spanish viceroyalties get reorganized, and they decide to make them a little bit smaller and more manageable. So they create 2 new ones out of the pre-existing territory, Nueva Granada and Rio de la Plata. So important stuff to know about New Spanish art, the art of New Spain. We are going to talk a lot about hybridization. And right here, I'm looking at the bottom chunk of what I have in front of you. Art production in the Spanish viceroyalties in the Americas exhibited a hybridization of European and indigenous forms and materials with some African and Asian influences. Although much colonial art is religious, non-religious subjects such as portraiture, allegory, history, and decorative arts were central to Spanish viceregal territories. So your unit sheet has a ton of awesome information, and I'm going to copy and paste the important little tidbits of this where appropriate with the artworks that they're most related to. But these screenshots do come directly from your unit sheet. All right, so this is pretty much what we talk about when we talk about the viceroyalties of Spain. I'm going to use my little cursor here. Let me turn on my little red thing. It helps me out. Turn on my laser pointer. All right, so pretty much this whole area up here early on was called New Spain. So that's pretty much all of Central and Mesoamerica. A little bit of the northwest of the United States. Excuse me, not northwest, southwest. The Caribbean, and also a little bit of Florida. Everything South America was called the Viceroyalty of Peru. So this was New Spain, this was Peru. As you can see, these are massive territories, massive chunks of land. So later on in the history of the viceregal era, after the year 1700, it gets split up to make it a little bit more manageable. New Spain pretty much stays the same and actually got a little bigger. They keep the Viceroyalty of Peru kind of in the middle here, but then they make the south chunk the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata, and the northern part the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada. It just makes them a little bit more manageable, easier to govern. All right, so words we're going to talk a lot about. You're going to hear maybe me use different versions of this. Hybrid art, fusion art, blended art. There's lots of different ways to refer to these art forms, but they all pretty much mean the same. You're fusing two different art traditions or more than two together to make a new one. And when we think about the New World at this point in history, we really need to think of it sandwiched between Asia and between Europe. You've clearly got territories that have been established and claimed by a European power, the Spanish. They are going to bring stuff from Spain. There are Spanish people living here now, and they are establishing themselves, and they are dying, and they are living life, and they're getting married, and they're having children. So you have a new type of people being born, Creoles, a mixture of you have Spaniards that are born in the New World, not ever setting foot on the nation of Spain, on Spanish territory. And you have the mixing of races, which is going to be a big thing in one of the works in our curriculum. But then you also have trade networks that connect all of these places together. So there are things that flow in from Asia, there are things that flow in from Spain, and you have them all collide in this viceregal era. It's really interesting. So a viceroyalty is a local political, social, and administrative institution created by the Spanish monarchy in the 15th century in the New World. So a viceroyalty is ruled by a viceroy. This guy pretty much works for the Spanish king and queen and is their representative in the New World. Think of them like the governor that answers to the president. The president is the king of Spain. The king of Spain lives in Spain. King, queens of Spain never come to the New World. The viceroy is the highest position you could have in the New World. And many of our works were commissioned by the viceroy. So it's important for us to understand who was ruling Spain, at least basically at this point, because it does dictate stuff that happens in the New World. If they are in charge, the guys that are in Spain, their influence is going to be felt elsewhere. So early on in Spanish colonial history, in the viceregal era, it was the Spanish Habsburgs that were in charge of Spain. We're going to be talking about sexy gentleman on the left, Philip IV of Spain, when we talk about Diego Velázquez. The Habsburgs were a super inbred line of rulers in Spain. They are famously known for the Habsburg jaw. They had lots of physical deformities because of the inbreeding. They believed in purity of blood, so they constantly inbred. Charles II there on the right, he is the final Habsburg. He pretty much can't do anything. He can barely survive as a human being. He had lots of physical deformities and mental deformities, mental inabilities, and that was because of inbreeding. So the purity of blood got the best of the Habsburgs. But in terms of their leadership ability, yes, they were in charge when the Spanish conquered the New World, but they could care less about how things were run over there. All they cared about is that they got their money and they got the wealth that came from conquering this New World. How the New World was organized, how the viceroy dealt with that organization over there was not something they cared about. So at this point, stuff was pretty disorganized and they're considered pretty bad managers. But in 1700, after the Habsburgs die out, there's something called the War of Spanish Succession. Pretty much there's lots of different royal lines in Europe that fight for the right to the Spanish throne. And ultimately it's the Bourbons, who were actually a French line, that come into power around the year 1700. They are much, much better managers. They look at what the Habsburgs had created over there in the New World, and they're like, oh my God, this is so disorganized. They have to totally reorganize it. They have to figure out new ways to regulate things. They have to modernize the New World. They change a lot. They also freaked out Europe because that gave the Bourbon family even more power. They were powerful in France, and now they have power in Spain, and that was a problem. But they pretty much come in and they clean up the Habsburg mess. So in this era of history in the New World, we see some artwork that showcases this need to organize and to classify and to regulate things and to better kind of create systems for things that were happening in the New World. And they have their own issues too, but we'll get to that when we talk about the Baroque art. Or not Baroque art, excuse me, Romantic art in class. All right, so when the Spanish colonizers get to the New World, they had three major goals. And these three major goals are represented by three artworks on our curriculum. Number one is to learn. They have to get in there and they have to learn about these new people that they want to conquer or have just conquered, and they want to document that. Number two, they need to convert. Converting people from their indigenous religions to Christianity is going to make everything else that they want to do much easier. So converting them to Christianity is a very, very top priority. And then number three, once they have all of this new land and new peoples underneath their territory that are Christian, they're going to protect and defend it on all fronts. So goal number one, learn. So in the 15th century, after Columbus landed in the New World, many European powers were dedicated to conquest and colonization of the New World. Spain was the dominant nation claiming land in this region and set up multiple viceroyalties, territories under Spanish control, were established. The primary one being New Spain, which was mostly present-day Mexico, large portions of the American Southwest, and some Central America. Viceroys were appointed by the king to be in charge of a viceroyalty. Many works of art were made in order to be sent back to the King of Spain and show him visuals or info on the territories and peoples he now controlled. So that brings us to this particular work, the frontispiece of the Codex Mendoza. It was made for and under the leadership, the patronization of the Viceroyalty of New Spain. That guy's name was Antonio de Mendoza, which is why this is called the Codex Mendoza. It is a book, and we just have one page, one folio from this very cool book. Guys, I think that out of all of the codexes, all of the books we have on our curriculum, we have looked at a lot. This is probably my second favorite, maybe even my first. I love my boy Jahangir, as you know, preferring Sufi Sheikh to Kings, which came from a collection of images, a book. But in terms of a whole book, this might be my number one. This is the Codex Mendoza. We just have one page from it, but I am going to talk to you about the whole thing. So it is called the Codex Mendoza because it was made for Antonio de Mendoza, who was the first viceroy of New Spain. Here is a picture of him. He pretty much seems to have had this made to send it back to the King of Spain, to show the King of Spain a book all about the people he had just conquered. It never made it to Spain, unfortunately. This is an unfortunate fun fact about the Codex Mendoza. It was shipped back to Spain, literally, but it was intercepted by pirates, by French pirates, and never made it to Spain. And it's lived some lives in different curiosity cabinets and collections and organizations, and I believe now it's in the Oxford libraries, I think, in England. But point being, it was made for the King of Spain, by the Viceroyalty of New Spain. He had it made for him, but it never made it to the King of Spain, unfortunately. So here we're seeing it open, and we can see the frontispiece on the right, and we can see a page on the left. A frontispiece is an illustrated page facing the titled page of a book. Essentially, guys, a frontispiece is the beginning illustration of a book. This announces the book. This begins the book. A really cool thing about the Codex Mendoza is you have pictures on one side, and then you have translations in Spanish on the other. So that's an important thing to know about the format. You see imagery, and then oftentimes in the imagery, you'll see translations of what's being depicted. And then on the opposite page, you'll see Castilian, which is an older form of Spanish that pretty much translates what you're seeing on the other page, because there's also glyphs. So this had to have been a combination effort between indigenous artists who made the paintings, and then European artists who made the book, which is a very European format book, and did the translations in Spanish. When we look at this frontispiece, there should definitely be some imagery that is familiar to you. We see the eagle perched on top of the prickly pear with a snake in its mouth. And in the middle of this page, we can see the eagle perched on top of a prickly pear. So there's definitely some imagery that we definitely should remember looking at. When we see this eagle perched on top of the prickly pear, we can notice that he's sitting on top of a square that's broken down into quadrants with like an X. Well, guys, the capital city of the Aztec, the people that this book is documenting, were founded on a city called Tenochtitlan. The original wandering Aztec people were told to look for that symbol, and when they found it, it was in the middle of a lake called Lake Texcoco. Tenochtitlan was broken down into quadrants, so we seem to see on this page a very minimalized and abstracted representation of the city of Tenochtitlan, the story of its founding, with the eagle perched on top of a prickly pear, and the basic layout of the city, broken down into quadrants here. So, we should definitely remember the city of Tenochtitlan. We talked about it and their main temple, the Templo Mayor, which is reminiscent of the birthplace of their patron deity, Huitzilopochtli. His sister killed their mother, and as she was sweeping on top of Snaky Mountain. Templo Mayor is like Snaky Mountain. And then Huitzilopochtli is born. He kills his sister in revenge. He throws her body down the side of the mountain, and she lands at the base, all discombobulated, all completely dismembered. And we have the Koyushoki stone on our curriculum as well. So on this page, we see the eagle perched on top of a prickly pear in the center. We see the reminder of the fact that Tenochtitlan is broken down into quadrants. We can see the blue color of the water that would have been a big part of the city of Tenochtitlan. On the side, you see glyphs. That is the Aztec language. And in between all of these quadrants, we can see that there are many very abstracted figures. They're minimal. They're tiny. Those represent the original founders of the city. And there's little symbols that are attached to their necks. It looks like balloons. Those are symbols that let the artists know who they are. But as you can see on their little bodies, their names are translated. But these are the initial people who were wandering and the leaders of the Aztec people who saw the eagle perched on top of a prickly pear and built the city where it was located. So this showcases their city, the city's foundation, and the beginning of their history. At the bottom of the page, so we're going down to the very bottom. Let me go back for a second, guys. Down here, underneath that imagery, there is some imagery related to conflict that's going on. We can see that there's a big person and a little person, and in the background it looks like steps with a roof, but it's exploding. They're like tipping off the sides. These are exploding temples. So what we see here are the first two people, enemy people, that the Aztec conquer. So the Aztec are represented by the big, and the enemy that they defeat and conquer and make their subject is small. So anytime in this book you see a little exploding temple, that represents another people, another group that the Aztec conquered. It's interesting imagery. The imagery is clearly made by indigenous artists, but you have Europeans who are sitting there forcing them to draw it out and to recap their history, and then translating it for themselves and on the other pages so that they can send it back to Spain, and the Spanish king and queen can learn all about these new people that they have just conquered. So the Codex Mendoza has 3 sections. This book documents all of the most important things to know about the Aztec civilization. And the frontispiece is the only page we have on our curriculum. But I do want to explain to you the 3 sections, at least basically, because they're great. After you turn the page of the frontispiece, you're going to find section 1, the dynastic history. Over their approximately 100-year history, the Aztec had 12 total emperors. Every emperor gets its own page. On the pages, there are glyphs, and on the pages, you also see representations of all of the enemy peoples that emperor conquered. You can see all of these exploding temples. So this emperor here, whoever this page represents, definitely conquered more people than this emperor here. So that's pretty cool. The second section of the Codex Mendoza is the tribute list. These are pages dedicated to all of these lands and enemy people that they had conquered, and all of the booty or spoils or tribute that they demanded from those people. When they conquered people, they didn't just kill them. They were like, you're ours, we're in charge of you now. In this area, you have lots of leopards. Leopards. You have lots of this, you have lots of that. So these pages document essentially what the Mexica, who lived in Tenochtitlan, demanded from all of these people that they conquered. And it's drawn out in pictorial form and translated into Spanish. And then last but not least, probably my favorite part of this book, illustrations of cultural practices. So the last section documents all of this interesting information about how the Aztec did certain things, how they educated their kids, how they structured their customs for marriage, how they prepared for war. There are some super interesting things in here. It talks about how boys were raised, little boys were raised as opposed to little girls, how much food little boys were given as opposed to little girls. Little boys were given more, little girls were given less. It shows you like the growth in how many tortillas they were allowed to have per day. It documents how Mexica parents would punish their kids by burning fires with chilies and sticking their face into the chili smoke. It's interesting stuff. So something I want you to consider, because they can be connected on this theme. How do both of these objects represent time? How do they visually represent time? Because they do it in different ways, but they are connected via either being made by the Aztec culture or representing the history of the Aztec culture. And now we're going into conversion. The colonizers got in there and they learned about these people and they made friends and they learned their language and they did all of this kind of rudimentary like digging work before they went in and then converted. When you convert people into your religion, it's going to make everything else way easier. The religion of the Spanish is Catholicism, so that is a major branch of Christianity. So Spain was Roman Catholic, and they brought those beliefs with them to the New World. They want to use art to convert people into Catholicism. It's important. Also, in the very bottom of that first section, note, during the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe, the Catholic Church was already involved in a fight for its survival and power in Europe with the Counter-Reformation. So the Spanish are Catholic, guys, and the Spanish at this point are very used to fighting for their faith. They were kicking the Muslims out of Spain during the 1400s. They were dealing with the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. And at the same time, converting people to Christianity in the New World. So they were kind of professionals at this conversion thing, or defending their faith. And with these two artworks coming up, we're definitely going to see how European and indigenous styles collide. We're going to see something called transculturation, the merging and converging of cultures happening. But we're going to see it in visual art. So we are going to look at probably one of the most famous images of the Virgin Mary that is associated with Central and South America, particularly Mexico, guys. So we have yet another Marian image. Marian images dominate our curriculum, but this one is in the New World. And this one represents not just the Virgin Mary, but a specific version of the Virgin Mary, and her name was the Virgin of Guadalupe. So the Virgin of Guadalupe, the original image, the image that is considered sacred, sits in the Basilica de Guadalupe in Mexico City. This is the original, guys. It is considered to be a sacred image, a magical image, a miraculous image because of the story that it's associated with. Here we can see Mary. She stands. She has a blue cloak on covered with stars. The sunburst mandorla radiates behind her. Check out her skin. It's pretty ashen, darker. She stands on a crescent moon and is supported by a little guy at the bottom. We have, not the original in our curriculum, a copy. Any copy of the original version of Guadalupe image, the miraculous one that's in the Basilica de Guadalupe, is what is called a phenocopia, a true copy. Meaning that when the artist made it, their goal was to make it as true and realistic looking of a copy as possible. There are countless phencopias of the Virgin of Guadalupe made in New Spain. Anyone who had money wanted a copy in their home, because obviously they cannot have the original. So in order to understand the significance of this image, we have to know about this guy named Juan Diego. And guys, the story of Juan Diego is told in little bits and pieces in our painting on our curriculum, in these little roundels that are in the corners. So Juan Diego was an indigenous man, guys. Important to know the synopsis of this story. He was an indigenous man who had recently converted to Christianity. Important to know. So he's walking along outside of what we now call Mexico City by this hill called Tepeyac Hill. And the Virgin of Guadalupe appears to him. And the Virgin of Guadalupe, who is the Virgin Mary, guys, please don't confuse that. This image is called the Virgin of Guadalupe, but it is the Virgin Mary. She appears to Juan Diego. She speaks to him in his language. She's not speaking a European language. She's not speaking Latin. She's speaking to him in a language he understands, Nahuatl, the indigenous language of the Aztec. And she says to Juan Diego near Tapiac Hill, Juan Diego, build me a shrine right here on this spot. Go back to the city, tell the bishop to build me a shrine, and it needs to happen ASAP. Juan Diego is shocked, astonished. He is like, whoa, this has to happen. He goes back to the bishop. He says, Bishop, the Virgin Mary appeared to me. She said, build this shrine. We need to do it. And the bishop's like, no, I don't believe you. I need more proof that this happened. So Juan Diego goes back to the same spot. The Virgin of Guadalupe appears to him again, and he tells her what happened. And she's like, Juan Diego, take off your cloak, take off your tilma, and here. And she like makes a whole bunch of roses, Castilian roses, appear. And she says, gather all these roses. And remember, guys, roses and rose windows back from the Gothic period. Roses are a symbol, one of the many symbols of the Virgin. She says, gather those, Juan Diego, in your cloak, take them back to the bishop and present them as your proof. So he does that. He gathers all the roses. He runs back to the city. And as he opens up his cloak to like let all the roses out, the roses fall out, but there is a miraculous image of the Virgin of Guadalupe on his tilma. So guys, the miraculous image that appeared on Juan Diego's tilma is this image. This is Juan Diego's tilma. So this is why it's considered to be such a famous image, because it's the actual image that appeared miraculously on his cloak. So it's sacred. It's important. Guys, there are some interesting additions made to the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And we just have one of the many true copies of it on our curriculum. It's a cool one. It was made in the later 1600s, so some years after the original. It is super shiny and has a lot of Japanese influence and New Spain influence, but interesting that when this image of the Virgin appears to Juan Diego, an indigenous man, she speaks to him in his language. She is therefore more relatable. She has ashen skin, which makes her look darker and slightly more indigenous, which again makes her more relatable to the indigenous population. And then also, guys, the sunburst radiates from behind her. There are stars all over her cloak, and she stands on a crescent moon. All of the religions of the indigenous Americas, and in particular, I want you to think of the Aztec, are associated with natural phenomenon, with the sun, with the stars, and with the moon, and all the other natural forces. So they connect her with skin color, they connect her with language, they connect her with representations of the forms that they associated with the divine. Not a coincidence when their goal was to try their best to convert as many people as possible. So this is considered to be one of the most sacred images of the Christian world in Central and South America. I got to see this true copy that's on our curriculum at the LACMA when I went to Los Angeles a few years ago. In the corners, you can see the story. There's Juan Diego. The Virgin Guadalupe appears to him. There's angels flanking him. And then she's like, here's some roses. Go and show these to the bishop. And then down below, he's like, okay, I'll go show them to the bishop. And then down here, he is holding his tilma in front of him. There's some roses on the ground, and their miraculous images there. Also featured, we have a little reference to the founding of Tenochtitlan. Again, eagle perched on top of a prickly pear. Pretty cool work, guys. And something that it has that is super, super, super synonymous with New Spain is it has encanchado. All of these little pieces of essentially mosaic that are put together are not tile, they're not glass, they are mother of pearl shell inlay. And this is a major feature of New Spanish art. It is commonly used, and we're going to see it in another one of our works too, called the Brooklyn Biombo. And we can see it in the little roundels, we can see it in the big painting as well. So they built her shrine, guys. This is the Virgin of Guadalupe's Basilica, the original, built in the Spanish colonial era. Check out the architectural, oldness. But this has become such a spot for pilgrimage for so many people in the Christian world, and particularly the Latin American Christian world, Catholic world. they have had to make a bigger Basilica de Guadalupe. So this is the original. This is the new one. The miraculous image sits inside of this one. And it is at the base of Tepeyac Hill. So it's a pretty cool one, guys. Notice the identification based on the original Virgin of Guadalupe in the Basilica of Guadalupe in Mexico City. And last but not least, out of the big three, guys, protect and defend. That's what the colonizers needed to do. And art is a major tool for them to be able to do that with. So a reminder, the Spanish are hardcore Catholic, and they are intensely converting people to the Catholic faith and defending the Catholic faith in the New World. So they are part of the same movement that the Italians are. The Italian Baroque, we're going to talk about these dramatic, over-the-top, like influential images that want to sway people or scare them or make them so enamored that they want to stay Catholic or go back to being Catholic. And in the New World, the Spanish are converting people with images like the Virgin of Guadalupe, and they are encouraging them to remain devout Catholics. So in Europe, the Spanish are helping push back against the Protestants. In Europe, they are also in the process of, and have finished in most parts, pushing out the Muslims from Spain, reconquering in the name of Christianity. That was called the Reconquista. And then in New Spain, at the same time, they're converting all of these new people and these new conquests into Christians. So the Spanish are very, very, very into this effort. And here we talk about Angel with Arquebus, Asiel Timor Day, by a dude named the Master of Calamarca. And this was from the La Paz school, guys. So this is from the Viceroyalty of Peru. This is the only Viceroyalty of Peru artwork we have on our curriculum. All the rest was from New Spain. This was made at some point in the 1600s. They're not exactly sure what year it was made, and it's oil on canvas. So it's made with a very traditional European material. And at first glance, it looks very European. But that makes sense. There's a lot of European influence in this painting. So what we have here, guys, is a picture of an angel. And if you look carefully, yes, he does have wings. It looks like it can just be a continuation of this feathered hat, but those are wings. This angel has a very effeminate stance, a very delicate stance, wears very opulent clothing, and holds a gun. It's not common for us to see angels dressed like this, and it's also not common for us to see angels holding a gun, albeit he doesn't seem to be actively aiming at anyone or in the process of shooting, but the threat is there. So into New Spain and the Viceroyalty of Peru at this time, there were lots of European prints flowing in. So this is where artists are going to get a lot of their inspiration. And there were many, many prints of angels, of archangels, flowing into New Spain and into Peru. It's important to know that angels are seen as God's army. Angels are seen as defenders of the faith. And images like this are going to bring that to fruition more realistically than any other paintings of angels ever before. These angels really are defenders of the faith. So this angel holds an arquebus, and he has a subtitle, Asiel Timor Day, which is actually in the corner of the painting. So Asiel Timor Day means he who fears God, or fears God. So this angel fears God, as everybody should. So be good Christians, have faith, and that'll defend against any issue that might arise with God. So let's first talk about how this angel is dressed. He's dressed like a wealthy person, guys. He's dressed like the angel. Remember, angels are supposed to be androgynous. I might occasionally step up, but he's rich. The angel is rich. The angel is dressed like a noble person. This is someone that in the New World, a lesser important person, a poorer person would look up to and respect and understand that they had money. So it's an image that you would acknowledge and be respectful of. So dressed like an Andean aristocrat, this is a merging of European fashion and indigenous nobleman's fashion. His clothing, the angel's clothing, is excessively ornate. That suggests a very high social status. It's embroidered with gold. And feathers were representative of Inca nobility. So to an indigenous person, they would see this figure and they'd be like, oh, that's someone that's noble, rich, someone that's respected, and an angel. Oh my gosh, there's like added layers of importance and respect to be given to this image. And then, oh my gosh, on top of everything else, he holds a gun. And guys, there were images of European soldiers holding different guns in different positions, also flowing into New Spain at this point, into Peru. So they seem to have taken the influence of the angel's positioning and stance from one of these prints. But an arquebus is a large barreled gun. The Spanish brought guns to the New World. Before that, the indigenous peoples did not have guns, obviously. Indigenous peoples supposedly felt that guns were magical at first when they first saw them because they created fire. And then obviously understanding how they killed probably influenced them a little bit differently. But the angel quite literally defends the faith. He holds a weapon that is going to enable the angel to defend the faith at all costs. The angel is not someone that you mess with. The angel represents a angel, so that's a celestial being, a nobleman, someone of wealthy, noble status, and a military person, a person with a gun. So putting this all together, this is an image that would have commanded respect, that would have showcased a angel literally defending the faith. Dressed like a nobleman, dressed like an aristocrat, is an actual angel, so that makes it celestial, and then holds a gun, which is military. But you combine these all into one. And these images of angels with guns, these defender angels, are very unique to Peru, to the Viceroyalty of Peru. You do not see these in Spain. All right, guys, that's the end of part 1. Be sure to watch part 2 of Cram lesson number 3 for 3 more artworks: the Brooklyn Biombo, the Costa paintings, and last but not least, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. See you then.